save that. Cool. So hey, I'm Rhiannon Fletcher-Gallop, and where's the clicker? Need that. All right. So I'm an analyst at Deloitte, and I'm a builder of solutions. Anything you have, I'll have a go at it, build with it, and then come back with you with something. So whilst I am fairly new to this, I am a quick learner, and now creating serverless solutions is what I do all the time. So I've spent the last couple of years working on projects with tools and technologies that I didn't initially understand, and each involved things that were new. Even if for the most part they were just new to me, they were mostly up-and-coming technologies of the time. So I've had to learn a lot of things along the way, and today I'm going to talk you through some of the steps I take to go from problem to built, and I'll point out some things you should think about as we go along. So serverless. Serverless is a major tool that allows me to do what I do with the flexibility that makes it effective. Serverless was a fundamental shift in the way software development and technological practices work. And as developers, and even as non-developers or non-technical folk, we now have access to so many more building blocks, concept sandboxes, and fail-fast playgrounds that just make everything just so much awesome to build and so much easier. And it's in this serverless realm that I create most of my solutions. So AWS offers Lambda functions, managed services, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. All these things are there for you to go and use. AWS manages it all for you. All you have to do is go build. Go build. Go and build. It seems like a great oversimplification of a very complex and confusing process and situation. And yeah, it is. I agree on that, but don't worry, I'm here to help you get started. And, and if it feels like there is too much assumed knowledge here, and just too many things that you don't know how to start with, or you just don't know, then don't worry, that's how I felt, and hopefully, by the end of this talk, you have a little bit of a better idea on what serverless can do for you, and how you can just start building innovative solutions for yourself. Whether you're working on that personal project, automating a task, or fixing a problem that you've come across, or maybe you've been given something at work, then the approach is still the same, and there are certain steps that I found you should take to build that serverless and innovative solution. So, step one, we have a problem. What do we do? Well, this is the first step of my process, and it breaks down into two parts. First step, defining the problem. And part one is pretty straightforward. You define the problem, point out some parameters, anything that you might need, like requirements, goals, or maybe what you want your build to achieve, anything you may have been given. And this is where you really start to get to understand your problem, what's involved in the solution, and you start to think about what you want to achieve with it. And you want to make this initial problem quite a small scope. I found that small is much more manageable. And of course, if it's not your project, then this may be out of your hands, but it is your project, so you can look at how you can deal with that and how to move forward with managing it. So, and if it is that big project, then iterations will be key for you. You can start with the most crucial problem, or the smallest part of your problem, and work with that and iterate further. And now that you have your problem defined and some ideas about what you want to build and what you want to achieve, then it's time to assess. Drawing out your design, this really works for me. Visualizing the system in a nice modular way also makes it quite helpful when it comes to implementing a design. And you can really take time here to look at each component and break it down, see what you've dealt with before. And if you're physically drawing out your system, which is highly recommended by me, now is a good time to mark the bits you know, mark the bits you don't know, or maybe the bits that you're familiar with, and really take a look at that diagram. And if it still looks confusing, then don't worry, stop, break it down again, reassess, and try again. Make a plan to tackle each component. If you can't start with a central component, then work your way around from a different route. Maybe start somewhere else, build something else first, start with a different aspect of the problem, and move on from there. But make your plan, write it down. But it is a living plan though, so don't worry if you make it and break it a little bit. It's just there to facilitate your progress. Step 2. Getting stuck in is hard when you're faced with complex, new, or unknown tools and technologies. So there's a lot of things to consider and learn, and things don't always work out first time, and man, you can just fail, and things just don't always work, and things just stop us from getting started. And you really can't think like that, because if you get stuck thinking that this project is too hard, that you can't do it, then of course you're not going to get very far, because you're fighting yourself when you should be fighting the problem. And I've learned that there are 3 key things you have to get into your head to make any project work and to build any solution. The first, failing is okay. Failing is nothing to worry about. If what you're doing doesn't work, that doesn't really matter. A bad result can still be an outcome that you can work from. You can have any number of outcomes, and you might find that you cannot deal with your problem right now. Maybe this solution isn't quite there for you. Maybe the tools just aren't ready for what you've got. And you can just put that to the side, come back to it later, or maybe come from a different angle, solve a different problem before you can solve your own. There's always something you can do. There are many results of a proof of concept, and they aren't always what we think of as positive, but they are all outcomes you can work with. So you really have to remember that serverless and this cornucopia of services that AWS provides, together they create an awesome fail-fast playground, and the key is that they fail fast. What this means is that on AWS, you can spin up new resources, test ideas, and if they don't work, terminate the resources, try with something else. And again, on serverless framework, this means you can use command line tools, deploy your code to AWS Lambda, and at the same time create API gateways, get everything all up and running, all using one command, SLS deploy. And if that doesn't work, update the code, redeploy again. And there's no sense in trying to force technology to do the things it can't. Remember, if you're not just testing your own capabilities here, you're testing the technologies. And when you're innovating a solution, you're often using bleeding edge technology. And this is really exciting and interesting, but sometimes you're dealing with things that they don't always work, and they're sometimes just not fit for purpose. And for those times that things don't work out, you have SLS remove, and everything's cleaned up for you. It's amazing. The point here, though, is that if you're going into a project trying to create an innovative solution, it's not always going to work first time. And this is the second point. So the second thing you really need is a desire to learn. If there's one thing I bring to every opportunity, it's enthusiasm and a real joy for learning new things. There are so many things that you can learn. Skilling up isn't something you should avoid or opt out of. If you're dealing with things that are new or complicated or just that you aren't that great at, then going away and learning about it is just the sensible action to take. But if you're seeing learning as a chore, then I'm sorry, but there's not much fun for you here. The third thing, nothing is too hard. And if it is too hard, it's too hard right now. And you have options from this, and none of them include banging your head against a wall going, oh my God, it's too hard. I really cannot do this. You can do other things, and it's time to learn some new stuff, right? And yay, we love that. So, time to acquire knowledge. If you don't know how to do something, if you want to try doing something new, or if you're not that great at something and there's just something you just want to try, then you have to go away and learn about it, right? It's pretty obvious. And of all the steps, this has to be my favorite, and this is where that desire to learn really comes into play. I'm an avid learner and will always take opportunities to do so. So this is now you. Yeah, it's a sponge, and that's what you are now. You're going to go away, you're going to absorb everything you can find about your tools, your technologies, any just anything you have, any libraries, any packages, any frameworks, everything there is, all the keywords, you're going to learn all of them. And you're really going to look at each aspect of your initial problem. Don't forget about that. And in this stage, I personally prefer video tutorials, as watching someone and building along with them really gives you that kind of first bit of confidence, and you also see and get your first grasp and understanding of how this tool is used, how people are already dealing with it, and you can learn from that. And more importantly, you now have something you can refer to, right? It's all about building up those resources, kind of figuring things out and learning from it. And places like AKL Guru, Udemy, Coursera, even good old YouTube, they're really great places for this. But then if you don't like videos, then there's so many blog posts, like so many of them. Don't try to read them all, but they are great places to start with examples and, again, tutorials. So once you've had to go at a couple of those tutorials, then it's time to read all the documentation. Worst, they may have begun, like you would have looked at stuff and gone, oh my gosh, I don't know what these keywords are. They're very strange, new buzzwords, new jargon. But once you've had that go with tutorials, you kind of had a little bit better understanding of what they mean and what they mean when you're actually using them. And this is great, right? Because now you can kind of understand what things are and what they're saying to you, and that's how you learn. And when using AWS, this is pretty straightforward. They have so much documentation, all about the APIs, the services, how you use them, what you do with them. But if what you're dealing with is very, very new, then this isn't always the case. There could be some documentation, tutorials, maybe someone's got like one example out there, but it's pretty sketchy and you're not quite sure if you should use it or not. Maybe in the worst case, there's just some installation instructions and just source code, and if all that, it's not fun. And you're really taking the bull by the horns there, so depending on your project, this may not be worthwhile for you, and you may want to come back to it later. So now we get to the fun part. It's time to start having a go and experimenting. We've gathered that knowledge, we know what to use, we have some idea of the tools and technologies, we've got a plan, a vague design, and of course, that experimenter's mindset. But there's so many things to consider first. What infrastructure do we need? Platform, OS, compute resources, all of those things, what on earth will we need? But thankfully, we have serverless. We don't have to think about those things anymore. All those walls that were initially there, they're knocked down. And it's just, there's no need to make any of these decisions. You can build whatever you want, scale it up, down, left, right, horizontally, vertically, all of those things. All you have to do is go into an AWS console, click some buttons, add some resources, whatever you want, it's all so easy. And serverless is your best friend. Diving into building has never been so easy for you in the serverless playground. So the serverless framework, this means that you can just use the CLI, so command line interface, SLS create, and this allows you to bootstrap services from a template. You can add whatever you want, code, functions, whatever you need, and then just deploy it. As I said, SLS deploy. And this is so straightforward. But of course, if you're not comfortable with the command line, which you may want to become, then you can use AWS console, get comfortable there, and then move over to the serverless framework in the command line. And from there, you can build whatever you want. So now it's time for some refinement. You have a few experiments under your belt now, and you either have a lot of choices to make, or it's clear there's a solution that works best for you and for your problem. And if you do have a few options, work out which is easiest to adapt and grow as you expand your solution. And here, if you've hacked things together, which is often the case, now it's time to clean things up a little bit. Refactor your code, refactor your architecture, make things easier for yourself. And this will really help you because now we have to add in those constraints, those standards, those best practices, and of course, design patterns. And then you're done, right? Time to whack that publish button and send your solution out into the world, never touch it, never see it again. But wrong. Code is living and breathing. It naturally wants to keep growing, become stronger, and adapt to new situations. As my mentor says, finished code is dead code. It's time to pull out that Agile handbook, choose a methodology, and start another iteration of your selection. And congratulations, you've already finished your first iteration. And now there are many, many, many more to come. But now we go back to the problem stage again. Woo! And we expand that problem. Whilst before we may have dealt with one problem or a few use cases of it and not so much of all the things that you could deal with it and throw it its way. Or maybe we're dealing with a smaller part of a larger problem. Now you want to add more in, to expand it, see what else you can throw at it. And the steps I've talked you through today, they're cyclical. You don't just work your way through once and wash your hands of what you've done. You improve it. Maybe there are some APIs you could have used better. Maybe you hack things together. Are there any adaptations you can make to make it more reliable, more useful, more cloud native? Then if you've answered yes to any of those, welcome to your next iteration. You have to write down these proposed changes. It's really important to kind of make sure you're still keeping track with what you've done and what you need to do, as if you start just doing things, you can get quite confused and quite lost, or at least I can. Time to expand your problem, expand your solution, and write those things down. Through moving from the process of problem to built, you successfully learned some things. You now know a little bit more about some things that you initially knew little about, and that's a huge win. Now you're familiar with it, you can use it again, you can use it at a more advanced level. You know its strengths, its weaknesses, and you can carry these improvements through to your next iteration or your next project. So I've talked you how to go from problem to built, and it's not one size fits all for every project, but the skills you use can be adapted and lifted and shifted from one project to the next. Serverless is all about changing and adapting our own skills to fit our changing world. When I first arrived into the professional world of development and software development, I was given the opportunity to build a GPS tracker. And I was studying mechatronics at the time, which if you're not aware is robotics, so mostly hardware. And whilst I was working, I got the taste of AWS and serverless practices through my colleagues, and I've not looked back since. The next professional project I worked on was a serverless React app. And coming from a hardware background, this was totally out of my skill set. I've been writing C and C++ code to function and operate, and oh my gosh, it wasn't pretty. It worked, but that's about it. I couldn't understand it now if I look back at it. And I'd really spent a lot of my time dealing with hardware limitations and registers, they haunt me. So being given a brief for a web app was totally unfamiliar to me. And I'd played around with some Python and maybe some HTML before, but nothing past Rhiannon is awesome, an acid green font with amazing backgrounds of stretched images and just colors that you could really tell design was my passion. But the tools I was using then were nothing compared to what I had to use for this new project. They were all new, and the pressure I put on myself to build something brilliant and build it now was overwhelming. There was so much to learn, and it was all too hard. And it was because I was looking at one big lump. I needed to break it down. And this is when the first of Rhee's revelations was born. And I took a couple of days to just step back and walk through my problem and what I needed to know to do it and what I already knew and how I could kind of adapt myself to fit this new problem. And once I had that kind of written down, all those things I needed to do, I felt a lot better, but I kept slipping into that feeling that it's just all too much and there's so many things I have to figure out. I didn't know how to do anything. And this is when I learned that your mindset is really key to your progress. I had that desire to learn, but I didn't want to fail, and everything seemed too hard, and it stopped me from making progress. It took a couple attempts for me to realize that trying to tackle too much at once just doesn't work. I wasn't giving myself that important time to experiment and learn first. I expected just to be able to start building a solution without doing anything else beforehand, which, if you've ever tried to do yourself, you know this is an awful and frustrating experience and not something to be recommended. Giving yourself that time to learn and experiment is key to having a successful project. So, in that first project, I learned a lot. And over the next couple of projects and processes, I learned even more, and I learned that my process worked for me, and hopefully it works for you. So with each project I head into now, I start by defining my problem, drafting plans, evaluating my own skills and the skills required. And hopefully you've heard enough from me today and to know that next time you come across a project or a new tool or just something that you don't quite get, you need to step back, assess, allow yourself that time to learn, get into your experimenter's mindset, and just go build.